Lennie, it's a massive pleasure to have you joining us on our Sales Transformation podcast. It probably should have happened a bit earlier than now, but thank you so much for taking part.
Oh, thank you, Phil. I mean, the privilege and the opportunity is immense. I'm humbled to be here.
That's great. I think the topic of this particular podcast, which is exploring artificial intelligence through the lens of ethics, I think is incredibly relevant for the world in which we live today. But before we get started, I'd just like to explain to our listeners how I got to know Lennie. Lennie has been in contact with us for a couple of years. He kind of discovered the Masters in Leading Sales Transformation that we had and was kind of showing curiosity to join us. And after a couple of years, he did. And came over to us from Canada, which is great, and joined a particular cohort. And I think for me, what was impressive was the passion that Lennie had shared about the whole area of sales and sales effectiveness, and his desire to want to develop himself in this area by doing the masters. And he's been one of the most brilliant students we've had, I have to say. But Lennie, so this is how we met. I'll never forget the first time that I saw you in Kingston, I think it was, quite close to the office. I think we may have stayed at the same hotel.
We did.
But I think before we get going, perhaps you could share a few words about yourself and about your journey, your education, a little bit about your sales career, and perhaps you could also share sort of where you are now, who are you working for, et cetera.
Oh, would love to, Phil. Thank you. So my journey began as a sales rep in 3M. Carried the bag for a few years. I mean, about 6 to 7 years, progressive sales positions. Became a master sales coach trainer for the Middle East and Africa region with 3M, and then went on to lead a regional business, about $100 million or so in the business role, and then carried on to do a stint in Six Sigma, and then became a national marketing manager for construction markets. So been around the block and more with 3M. All in all, I think I spent 22 years from start to finish with 3M.
Okay.
And traveled a lot too. I traveled to about 35 different countries with 3M, so I've been blessed to do that. And then my early part of education, I did undergrad at the Watford School of Business in the UK, majored in marketing and did a minor in finance, of course. And then I moved to Dubai from Canada here to start my own consultancy business, ran it for a couple of years, did not make the big mucho monies that I thought it would do. So returned back to Canada, obviously left 3M and joined Puro later, which is Canada's biggest courier and freight company. Okay. And I worked with them for about 4 odd years. And currently now I'm the director of sales performance at Sysco Canada. And what we really do is we are in the business of sharing food and helping one another as we go, caring for one another. That's our purpose. So all the Burger Kings of the world, we serve them, and the Popeyes and so on and so forth.
That's fantastic. So thank you, Lennie. So let's move on to the topic of your final dissertation, and you became really interested in this whole area of artificial intelligence. So I wonder what brought you into this topic. I mean, you had all sorts of topics you could have majored on in that final thesis. You could have focused on sales management systems, you could have focused on transformation, but actually your focus was very much on the ethical practice of artificial intelligence. So why was that such a concern for you? Why did you do it?
Such an interesting question you posed there, Phil. Tell you all about it. So it happened that we were looking into some AI sort of app or application to help our sales reps. And I did some research and met 3 vendors. And out of the one that we chose was a vendor called Sales Choice. And the CEO of Sales Choice was Dr. Cindy Gordon, or not was, is Dr. Cindy Gordon, and a very close friend of mine and a mentor, of course. And so I worked closely with her to deploy this solution. But the short and long of it was when we really saw the people using it, one of our directors or sales directors was a bit, how should I say it, not really trusting what AI would put out, I mean, what the output was. And he would always question and query as to, I mean, this is a system. I mean, do we just believe it carte blanche, or how do I know it's always outputting the right kind of results that we should take action on? And I think that's where was the first beginning, I think, the spark that just lit. And, I was like, yeah, I mean, it could be there is something beyond. There's some doubt, an element of doubt in his mind that this might not be the case. And so I did pursue that with Dr. Cindy Gordon. And as we talked throughout, she said, why don't you explore this as part of a dissertation that you're doing in the master's? Would be a really interesting subject, because there's hardly any research or any material out there in the world on this. And I think that's how the very first instance started.
So when you talk about this, you talk about the ethical side of AI, like believing in the data. Is it fake news, if you like, that we're getting from our AI systems? Or because I think the particular system you were looking at was kind of focused on probability, wasn't it? Probability of sales pipeline. And I guess your sales director was sort of kind of questioning, is the should I believe in the probability data that I'm getting out of, this app that sits behind our CRM system? Is that right?
Absolutely spot on. Yeah. I mean, he was like, hey, how do I know it's doing the right thing and telling me the right thing? Right. So,
Yeah.
I mean, so I think, and just to add to that, Phil, there is like 2 types of AI. There's transparent AI, where the human beings work on code and the variables are all measured. And if should something go wrong, they can always go back and find out where the problem is, as opposed to what is called black box AI, where there's a ton of variables and the AI and the code is such convoluted that even should something go wrong, even the authors or the coders cannot find what happened, because the AI is just doing its own thing. And luckily, we did go with transparent AI with Sales Choice. So if an event of that magnitude should happen, we could always go back and search. But AI being new to everybody, I think there is, I mean, an element of resistance, an element of change, if you will. And people are always like, conscious of, hey, here's a system telling me what I should be doing. I mean, and I've never done that before. So there's natural amount of, I think, an inertia to be moved to get to that level. And if you read more and more on AI, I think you get more and more confused. That's the way I feel.
Yeah. I think for many of the listeners, I mean, the word AI now is becoming, sort of ubiquitous in a way. I mean, I was at a supper party with friends last night, and we had a discussion about AI from people that I never knew would even have heard of it. These weren't business people. It was a social context. It was mothers of children. It was, yeah. I mean, it was a cross section, I would say. But they were all talking about it, so they all kind of know the letters, but they probably don't know what AI really is. What is AI? And so I just wonder, and you've said yourself, you've got black box AI and you've got transparent AI. Well, I must admit, that's the first time until I read your dissertation, the first time I'd sort of cottoned on to the fact that there are 2 types, but it's 2 types being rather simple. Are there more, is there a taxonomy or a lexicon that we need to talk about before we get into your particular, should we understand some basic terminologies like what is machine learning? And I'm taking things down to a very basic level, but
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is different types of AI for sure. So there's narrow AI, narrow bound AI, narrow band AI rather, and then on the opposite end we got generative AI, and then we got the large language models. So the narrow AI would be something like sales choice, where you give in a set of variables and the algorithm will only work within those preset limits and the variables fed in. Whereas large language models are continuously learning and the iterations happen on a daily basis. So machine learning, that's where it comes in. So those kind of algorithms are programmed to scar every bit of data that's fed in and learn from it. So yeah, you're rightly so. There's two major types in that
Okay.
sense. Yes.
Well, that's great. And I think that one of the things in reading your dissertation that was quite interesting, because you were also connecting the challenge you had or the desire to introduce this piece of technology with workload. And you quoted some of the stats that came, I think, from Bora of Salesforce, where you said that 60% of salespeople's time is on non-selling activities and 34% on selling. So your motivation to introduce this new system was driven from a sort of increasing, I guess, the productivity of the sales force, as well as the probability of the outputs of their work. Is that correct in terms of how can we free up more time so that salespeople can spend more time selling? And then how can we start to more accurately forecast the outputs of the extra work or the work they put into sales?
100%. Well, you're spot on. I mean, that is looking at both the productivity, the effectiveness, and also like reducing downtime so that
Yeah.
salespeople could be actively selling and getting more business in.
So, okay. So that's great. So we've sort of setting the scene. This was the scenario. You had the sales director who was kind of a little bit resistant, but you also talked about in your dissertation a personal account of how you were engaged with a particular organization to find that you were talking not to a person but to a robot. Is that correct? You talk, yeah, and
Yeah, I mean,
I think
I mean, yeah, it's funny you say that, but it's an encounter, and when you personally go through it, then
yeah,
that's your wake up call. So you're right. I can tell you the story very quickly here. So I did attend an online webinar, as I most often do in my field of work and job, and this was on something a company called Conversica. They were offering some sales enablement technology, and just after the webinar ended, I got this lovely email from Alexis Taylor, who was an assistant there, and said, "Oh, Lenny, we love you. It was happy to have you on the webinar. Thank you," and so on and so forth. I thought nothing of it, went on my merry day. And then a couple of weeks later, I got another nice email from Alexis again, saying, "Oh, Lenny, would you like to talk to us more? What your interest?" Again, I ignored that. And long story short, this went on for a period of 6 months, literally, and I made nothing of it. I was, okay, another person just on my case. And then on the 6th month, just for the 6 months, excuse me, beginning of 6th month, I got another beautiful email saying, "Oh, I don't want to be a pest, but would really love to have you talk to us," and so on and so forth. And maybe I think that's where persistence broke me down. and, I,
yeah,
and I just gave in, and I said, I wrote a nice email back to Alexis saying, "Oh, Alexis, I admire your persistence. I've been in selling, and this is the first time I've seen somebody with such strong follow up, and I admire that. And then for that fact, I'm okay to take a call with you."
wow,
I laugh now because the very next moment I got an answer from Alexis, and it said, "Oh, thank you, Lenny. You would wish to talk to Leo, who's our sales agent." And I'm like, "So who's Leo then?"
yeah,
And I mean, and that kind of perturbed me. And the next day, when I did have a conversation with Leo, the first thing I asked Leo is like, "Leo, so who was Alexis?" And aghast I was to hear Leo said, "Oh, Alexis is our AI assistant, which you've been talking to."
yeah.
And I think that was my eureka moment when I said, I apologize to an AI chatbot
Yeah. I
for
know.
the first time in my life.
Yeah, and I think that's. I mean, it's so interesting because we talk about authenticity and client centricity as part of the work that I've been doing on values and mindsets, and I think I can completely understand your reaction. So did that stop you from continuing the conversation when you realized this was just a fake robot you're talking to, or did you in fact continue with
I think I was kind of, torn between two mindsets there.
yeah
Leo happened to be a nice guy. He was honest. He
yeah
told me what the chatbot was. But
yeah
I did protest in all manner of things that I
okay
could, saying that that was completely wrong way to approach a
yeah
client,
okay
because I really felt ashamed. I felt, that
yeah
I was taken for a ride, if you will.
yeah
And that is not right. I do not care how good your AI is and how good conversation it writes. But
yeah
I mean, when I look back, I feel that I apologize to a machine. So that is
yeah
stuck in my head.
I know I know, so interesting. I'm sure many of us have actually sort of had something, perhaps similar when you feel they haven't been transparent. If they were transparent at the outset somehow, and you knew that this is the process, then maybe you would have reacted a bit more differently. So, but I think you get it. What for me is such an important part of this conversation, which is it sort of draws into the ethicability of AI, and you've got it from human interaction, human to a bot. In this case, you shared your personal story, but you've also got it in the context of just data that's produced, and is data true or false? And so this ethical dilemma, I think you sort of see through different, they're sort of multifaceted, if you like. So let's come back to your thesis. Now, I know that you completed your thesis. I think it was in January 2022. I think
Correct.
that's when you handed it in.
Yes.
And I don't think you've been to graduation yet, Lennie, though. I hope one day you'll come over to London for
I did.
graduation.
I was at the graduation
Of
ceremony.
course.
Yes.
Oh, blimey. I missed.
Yes.
I wasn't.
Yeah, you were traveling. You said
I
you could
was
not make it.
traveling.
You were getting at the son's wedding in Portugal or
Oh
something.
yeah, of course it was. Of course it was. Okay, so I'm very glad you made it. Anyway, but okay, so let's go into the journey. So you had this concern. Could you talk us through um, the kind of things you did on the masters? Because you would have done some research. You would have started to explore, I guess, what's the current literature around artificial intelligence, and I think it was quite interesting to see some of the things you discovered about ethical frameworks, from geography to geography as well. But I wonder if you could just talk us through, sort of, was there a lot of research literature out there that you could see on this topic? And just generally, what did you find out when you started to do your literature research?
Yeah, I mean, great question. So yeah, I did exactly that. I just took out my research mind out and said, let me see what's out there. Uh, what I did find was ethics in AI was a fairly new topic, not very much written on it in the general scheme of things. However, each country, such as UK, Canada, USA, China, that I really focused on, they all had some sort of ethical framework that they were working
Yeah,
on, that they had put out there. And also, I tried to do like a comparative analysis with different types of organizations as well. So I use the countries as one. I use international, intergovernmental organizations such as the European Union, the World Economic Forum, the OECD, and the G20. Also looked at multinational technology companies like IBM, Google, SAP, and Baidu, and also non-profit organizations. So Equitas, AI Now Institute, the Red Cross, and Women Leading in AI. And last but not least, I looked at global consulting firms such as PricewaterhouseCoopers, Ernst& Young, McKinsey, and Deloitte. And each of them in these categories did have something to say on AI for sure. But I think what was lacking or missing out there was something very comprehensive, in terms of what ethics is and how it should be interpreted. And one thing I also went home with was there was not one definition for ethics as such that everybody could rely on and everybody could agree on, because I think just by the nature of AI, it has just evolved all around the world in its own kind of realm, as opposed to scientific or medical doctor practices as such, which has been highly regulated.
Yeah. I think it would be quite helpful because I think there were a number of principles against which you sort of evaluated ethical frameworks. And, it covered things like governance and transparency and so on. And I think you use that framework to kind of compare, the different framework agreements that you saw across those different entities. But do you think you could explain the different principles that you looked at? Is that possible to do for the listener? What
Oh,
area?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Would love to. Would love to. So I just got to say, I mean, this credit goes to Dr. Cindy Gordon, because I
Yeah.
developed these in consultation with her. So she calls them the Sales Choice 7 Ethical Principles. I mean, we collaborated on this together. So I just be remiss of me not to
Yes, of
mention
course.
or give her the credit. But yes, so there are 7 principles in all, Phil. And the first one is governance. And the definition for that is the policies, processes, and relevant technology components required to ensure safe, reliable, accountable, and trustworthy AI solutions. The second one is process. And the definition there is the roles and responsibilities, process architecture, methods and practices, and rewards and recognition to drive AI ethics in an organization. The third principle there is technology, and this includes the technical infrastructure, the tools needed to train in AI, and the people that manage the AI models. The fourth principle is people, and this talks to leadership practices as well as the roles and skills and performance of the people working with AI. The fifth principle is data and privacy. So it talks about the data attributes required to support all the AI models and the AI strategy. The sixth principle is transparency, where we talk about the algorithm explainability and the identification and methods of data selection that feed into the model. And last but not least, and the most important one here, is sustainability. So the plan of action for achieving desired level of AI sustainability in the organization. So those were the 7 principles and the definitions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you may not know this, and perhaps we have to have Cindy on the podcast as well at some time. But was that part of the basis of her own doctorate on the subject? Was that
No,
part
it
of,
was
oh,
no,
it
it
wasn't?
was not. This
Okay.
came about to answer, like I said, my concern at the beginning as to how sales choice and AI ethics works together, and then
Yeah.
Cindy said it would help the both of us to explore that, and that's how the
Yeah.
topic got built.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really interesting framework, and so when I was reading your dissertation, I was thinking there's a lot there's a lot here, and I began to think of Consalia, and been thinking about, to
Yes,
what extent do our policies cover AI, and with all of the developments that are now taking place, you know, how do we as an educational establishment, sort of establish policies? How do we communicate that with our students? There's so many things that you kind of triggered when I sort of went back to your dissertation and thinking, we really need to look into this. And I've already had a chat with Eddie about it actually before this podcast. But so yeah, it's really interesting. So a couple of things strike me. One is that you found with your research there wasn't a lot of academic research. I guess it's such a new and fast-moving world that
yeah,
there may be not a lot of academic research into this topic. The second is that against those principles, you found they're very different frameworks from country to country. There's no consistent one
right.
methodology for looking at this particular topic. So I guess the way is quite interesting, and you talk about it, the way you look at sort of facial recognition, for example. outputs. The way that you look at that, if you're in China, may be quite difficult, different to say in the USA. And
Yeah.
you found that the sort of moral dilemmas that you faced with this whole topic of AI varies a little bit from culture to culture and nation to nation. So just found it really quite interesting, that the difference. um Okay, so and you took these kind of frameworks, and then I think you then had a chance to explore. Well, for my own company, I think you ran some exercises to assess the level of maturity, and I don't necessarily need you to share, the detail of that, Lenny. But could you explain what you were hoping to achieve from that exercise?
I think the first and foremost thing I wanted to do was just even put ethical AI onto the dashboard, if you will, on the radar of the senior management team. Like, I mean, as you see organizations around you, everybody wants to jump on a quick solution of an app or an AI, and everybody readily does so. But I think none of us stand back to think and say, hey, was this app built ethically?
Yeah,
Was the data fed into this model ethically based, and so on and so forth? So I think my first attempt there was to just even create that awareness, if you will,
yeah,
of what it does mean to have ethical AI. And so therefore I had a bunch of questions, created a questionnaire of 5 questions for each of the principles. So the 7 principles
yeah,
into 5, I had 35 questions. And what I ventured out to do was explore the maturity of that awareness within the organization.
yeah.
So I had like a kind of a Likert scale,
Yes,
something saying from not mature to very mature kind of stuff, and in between. So slightly moderate and very
yes,
mature, in fact. And my findings, I mean, I did have mixed uh, participation for various reasons, such as the peak time that I was doing it in the business, because this was happened during December. But the small and short of it is that clearly there was not an awareness. Most of the answers fell between the satisfactory and slightly moderate satisfactory kind of maturity process.
yeah,
So, which really kind of conferred to me that there's work to be needs to be done.
yeah,
We need definitely to build the AI governance framework within the company, and I think so too. If I extrapolate that, I think to organizations as well, because even till today, now that I've finished, it's been a year and a half since I finished my master's. I
yeah.
have not come across companies who have an AI governance framework firmly established as part of their modus operandi or day-to-day operations.
I'm sure that's right. I think you're sort of moving very much into the unknown, but I can see the importance of the starting point almost for looking at implementing AI solutions for your own business is the governance model, the ethical framework, because that should inform the decisions you take about the type of approaches you might want to have for AI. So let's kind of, so you ran this exercise, for your own organization. You've shared a bit the feedback. If we start to come to the end of your dissertation, you collected all the data, you've done the literature kind of research, and you are now sort of forming a point of view about this topic. I wonder if you could kind of share what your, some of the major takeaways have been for you, the major learnings from the exercise that you did.
Oh yeah, definitely would love to do that. I think that the fun part here was like, when you have that inclination that AI is so new, and then when you got the data to corroborate that, like you feel as a student, at least in the dissertation, like, oh, I got something which I don't know how you say the word, kind of undermines, or probably not undermines the right word, that gives you more strength and potential to see I'm headed in the right path. So I think that's what happened there. Uh, so I thought long and hard on what I should be doing as an output of this exercise, really. And then what I thought in conjunction with Dr. Cindy Gordon again, because we sat and said, so what should be our recommendations on this topic, right? And so we thought of building something called a governance framework for board of directors on all the 7 principles and how they would go forth and forward. Like you rightly said earlier, Lenny, I'm thinking of building something for Consalia. So how would someone, if they were very keen on building a framework, where should they begin and what should be their kind of steps to take? Perhaps I think I took a stab at that, if you will, to say. So I started first of all with sustainability implications, because that was the least among the awareness that I found.
Yeah.
And sustainability is huge. And I think we talked about that the other day, because sustainability is becoming existential for us with climate change.
Yes.
And we were venturing to talk, and I said maybe AI is more serious and existential than sustainability. So
Well, I think, yeah, I'd love to talk to you about it because, yes, this whole sustainability issue. And yeah, you are comparing sustainability and, like you said, AI with climate change, and you are, challenging, I guess, the fact that AI is going to have a more serious impact on humanity than climate change. And I
I
think,
definitely stand. Oh yeah, I stand by. I know it's a huge statement to make, but
yeah,
please go on. Sorry, I interrupted.
no, it's, but I think it's something that we should talk about now, about why you feel this is the most important thing. What what are the trends that you see taking place? Now, particularly since you finished in 2022, but of course since then we've had ChatGPT, which has kind of taken over, and I think everyone is beginning now to be aware of AI, to be aware of kind of machine learning, aware of the power of this to help humanity and to destroy it potentially. So I think it's something we should talk about. Why do you think it's such a big threat, to put it ahead of climate change?
Certainly, Phil. I think you're right. I mean, since I wrote the dissertation, ChatGPT came along, large language models, generative AI. So if someone were to ask me what is a large language model, you would just say it's just like uh, a machine learning app which just injects, I think, gazillion amounts of data and then just keeps on learning and iterating every second, building on its own intelligence, if you will. I think the segue for me from that is everything that we're doing. AI is permeated every essence and fabric of our life, whether you know it or not. Every field, I think you said it earlier, we become ubiquitous with it.
Yeah.
And whether we are aware or not, AI has gone into every field on the planet. And just to bring it closer to climate change, we are building all these environmental models. Guess what? They're built on AI.
Okay.
So the question there that I know, the question begged there is like, hey, what if this AI model was not giving us the right direction? What if the data that was fed into this at the beginning, and that's what the design we talk about, the very
Yeah.
first when the machine was built, that this was put as part of its DNA? Because if it's like what we say, practice makes perfect, but it's perfect practice. Good practice makes good perfect. But if you have bad practice, that makes bad practice perfect too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the essence is, where is the good of that, and who decides that? I mean, how do we know? Because data scientists work very clearly on data. They're very excited about data and how it can A is equal to B and B is equal to C, or A squared plus B equals C squared. But you need a human sentience to talk about ethics, to say, wait a minute, was this model fed only data from the US? And now we're going to put it as a world map to say there's rainfall in China or India, for example. Or was this model fed from data from every country in the world? How do we know? Who knows? Who checks?
Yeah.
We're talking about the wildfires that are happening today. I mean, globally, really. I mean, where did the heat come from? I mean, again, had we known that our models were there to that level of precision, we should have been forewarned. At least that's my saying. And therefore, that leads me to believe that I think if the lead on here is if we believe that everything is being run by AI and it's going to be sustainably increasing in the near future, and it's just going to be iterative and exponential in growth, when do we ever take a step back and say, hey, but let's go back to the beginning and see the foundations of these models? Because very few people know that an AI machine also needs feeding and caring just like humans do. Because if that does not happen, something called happens is a phenomenon called drift in the model. And drift is nothing else but AI just going its onward, leeward way without any kind of the checks or balances, like I said. So it is two things, not only to get the ethical right at the beginning of the machine, but also to keep it consecutively fed and watered and doctored and disciplined as we go forward. Because if you do not take care of the drift, you would eventually go to a wrong path.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. So I'm feeling rather nervous about AI now based on what you've just said. But I think we've also talked about, the positives of AI, because so I wouldn't mind, sort of there's a there's a sort of a tension between what it can do if it's managed well, I guess, and the contributions it could make to sales performance, I imagine, could be immense. But equally, as you rightly say, if the data we're getting is not clean data, it's not good data, then it could be the other way. So where do you stand on this? How do you see AI in sales? Do you see it as a really positive, thing, or do you see it as something to be very concerned about and wary of?
No, I absolutely think that's a great question, Phil. I absolutely think AI is a force for good. I absolutely think that all of us should jump onto the AI bandwagon because, like I rightly said, I think Google just invented a new quantum computer, and then that can do trillion calculations less than 6 seconds. I mean, the evolution of new computers, new models is just going to go on. I mean, there's no stopping that. I think we'd really miss out if we do not work with the AI. But I think the caveat here is to coexist with AI rather than resist AI. I think that's kind of my mantra. But having said that, it is to instill this ethical piece. So right at the design stage, right when the data scientists are building those very first steps of code into the machine, we incorporate the ethics into the DNA piece, and then we build on that as we go forward. I think so. Those checks and balances, I think AI is definitely a force for good and something which is transparent as well. So, God forbid, if the main coder passes away, somebody else takes over, they can go back to the machine and look at it and say, oh, now I know, I can check back, do some fault correction, as opposed to black box where the machine alone knows or maybe doesn't know what it's doing.
So, if you were sort of giving some advice to someone else in a sales enablement role who's looking at, all these, AI-driven sort of technologies, what can people do to actually determine whether this is good AI practice, or how do you know it's a black box-driven AI solution versus a human, sort of affected DNA? Is in its design. Are there any questions you can ask, or how would you know if it's ethically designed? Because I guess they don't need to tell you that when they sell you a solution. What questions can you ask?
Yeah, that's a great question, Phil. So on the outer, AI is AI; it just looks the same.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's just like the hood of the car. If you open it, then only you can see in. But AI is if you open, you just see code. And for a normal person like me,
Yeah.
I do not read code or do not write code.
Yeah.
So I think the essence there is just to ask. So the persons who
Okay.
build the model, they know whether it's transparent or black box, and they'll be able to tell you. If it is transparent, they'll be able to tell you all the variables that they put into it. They'll tell you about the logarithm, the algorithms that they use. There are different types of algorithms there, the decision trees and models of those. And the ethical piece, which is our focus of our conversation today. Yeah, I mean, did they talk about that? Did they take that into consideration and perspective while they're building that code? Are they very open and honest when they talk to people saying, hey, this is run by a machine as opposed to a human being. Because with ChatGPT on the corner here, we do not know whether we are talking to a machine or to a human being now. I mean, because it really emulates us so well. And I think the last thing here is we're talking of sentience. I mean, there is, I think, I was just reading again my dissertation at the prior of our conversation here, and Weizenbaum is a late computer scientist, not with us now. And he goes on to say that no matter how intelligent an AI machine can be, if it does not feel and does not have emotions, as in sentience, then maybe it's not the AI we really want to have, kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's the acid test. That's where we need to still treat a machine as a machine because of that sentience piece which is missing.
Yes, I think you quoted, was it Weizenbaum as well, who was one of the people that wrote, that non-human should not be in professions that require human interaction. Was that?
True.
Was that? Yeah. So,
yes.
So people have obviously sort of given some thought to this, and academics, who've done research on the topic. So I think it's it's really important that we make this ethical issue more prominent. As an issue that sales directors and heads of sales enablement should be more kind of aware of. Okay, well, I think that's been really interesting. Where is this study on ethics taking you, Lennie? How do you see it? Kind of, have you stopped now? You've done the dissertation, or how is it kind of feeding into what you're currently doing?
I think I shouldn't say this. The word sad part is, I mean, there's a lot of talk about ethics all over the world in AI, but nobody seems to have put it on paper. For example, I do not see an RFP going out which says, hey, can you please show me your ethical principles on how this data, this model, this AI was built on? Or, what sort of checks and balances do you have in the system? Or, for example, a quick example in the sales area I was talking about, let's say the model was built on 50% of the people, or maybe say 30% of the people were women and 70% of the people were men. And then their way to market and the talk and whatever they say is different, but the model was already skewed to begin with. And then we take the model and put it across the entire sales force. Whereas the sales force at 80% women and 20% men, and then you can see what happens. As this is just a simple gender example.
Yeah.
And this could be extrapolated into language, into culture, into maybe currencies, what have you.
Yeah.
And they have to be precise, and the model has to be tweaked every time. It's not like one and done. There's to be continuous kind of checks and balances to have parity with what's happening in the real world, so the model doesn't go drift, like I said earlier. And I think that's in a world where the ethics has to come into life of its own. That's where ethics has to be front and center of every organization. And I'm sure at this stage, every organization has got a few, if not thousands, of AI models working, unbeknownst to everybody in the organization.
Yeah.
And nobody has ever asked the ethical part. How were they built? When were they built? Who's looking after them? Why and how?
Yeah. God, it's so interesting and so important. I know that you're very close to the work that Cindy is doing, and those 7 principles that you referred to sort of earlier in the conversation. Have you found, that Cindy's work in this area is kind of unique, or are you finding examples now of other software and AI-driven apps, also addressing the ethical principles, or are you still finding it very rare to come across?
I'm still finding it very rare, Phil. In fact, last month I was talking to one of our AI developers in sales. He approached me through LinkedIn, and we just got talking on the very topic. And he said, Lennie, if you could give me a couple tips, your 2 cents, what would that be? And my very first was, have you done anything on ethics on this? And I got the, huh? kind of reaction from him.
Really?
And this gentleman has been in the AI business for more than 20 years, built companies and sold them. And I think this was his fifth iteration of building something.
Wow.
And just that reaction from him, I had to take a seat back and say, oh, so to your point, I think ethics has to be the foundation, if
Yeah.
not anything else, of any AI application built, any application, I would say, around the world. And then only then we can rest assured and say, hey, I feel good about this because has been built ethically, the ground up, so I can trust it.
Lennie, if a listener wanted to learn more about the kind of survey that you did, in terms of, you talked about the sort of moderately are we doing something and
Yeah.
against the 7 principles that you mentioned earlier. I think you mentioned 35 different questions. Is that something that listeners could get access to in some form, or would you be happy to share that, or could we give them your details to contact? Or, I mean, how do you feel? Perhaps we need to talk to Cindy about it as well to see if she's happy. But I
Yeah,
think
I
people
think
are going.
the first port of call was just to check back with Cindy as to
Yeah.
how we share that IP
Okay.
there in terms of these questions, because
Okay.
they were specifically built on the
On the
understanding for the
7.
project.
Okay.
And so yes, but if Cindy gave us a green light, then for sure I'd be
Okay.
happy to share them all.
Okay. Oh, we'll take this bit of the conversation offline. We'll talk to Cindy about it, and then perhaps we could, if she's happy for us to share it, recognizing it was her IP on it, then it will be wonderful. I think you'll give people perhaps something to kind of think about.
Right.
Okay. Well, is there anything else that we haven't talked about, Lennie, that you feel? Are there any questions I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
No, I think you were brilliant, Phil. You asked me all the questions. I mean, I had a great time talking to you. I mean, in conclusion, I can only say that I think I had a visual there in my dissertation talking of human-centric AI. I
Yeah.
mean, so my kind of appeal to the world of all the developers and the trainers and the programmers, if you will,
Yeah.
is that let's build human-centric AI where humans and AI can exist. I mean, peacefully complementary to one another, as opposed to having these fake bits and risks
Yeah.
of cyber warfare and what have you.
What you said a couple of things that just sort of triggered in me. You talked about you've not yet seen an RFP where the RFP has kind of asked for the AI and ethical policy in the way it's been developed. And I mean, if that was if that was a norm, then I guess it's going to make companies create the right policies, and that would be a really interesting conversation to have with the buying community, um, and that may help drive a different type of behavior with the software developers. But also from the the sales community, I think the more that they go into this with eyes wide open, the better decisions they'll take on the sort of apps that they will have to support their their sales organizations. But and I know that we've spoken most of this time talking about ethics and AI, but I wonder whether you've got any comment to make between AI and sales performance. Have you managed yet to have looked at how AI has improved performance, of the organization through some of the initiatives that you've managed to introduce?
I mean, I personally have not done any correlation studies as such, but I did read some third-party independent ones where they have made some correlations, and they have said that AI did help in the productivity and efficiency of the people involved in sales. So I firmly believe that to be true as well, or it can be true. Again, I think it's like everything else we say in life. You can take a horse to the water, but cannot make him drink. So you could have the best system in AI in the world, or CRM, or what have you. But if you do not have the sales reps and the entire sales community or fraternity participating in it,
Yeah.
right from the CEO down, as I say in my recommendations, the CEO is the kingpin here.
Yeah.
And if he or she does not like pass it down to the rank and file, then I don't think we would get 100%. So I think
Yeah.
the use to have a product which is really good is one thing, but the use of it is also the second part to get the results you're looking for.
That's fantastic. Lennie, I think we're close to the hour, and it's been such a great interview. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone here. So I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on the Sales Transformation Podcast.
Well, thank you, Phil. It was great. A pleasure to be here. And was great recounting my experience in the dissertation. I mean, just to say, to close off how we met. So give it some context there. I was looking for a long time to do an MBA. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm in sales for such a long time. Maybe there's something out there, masters only in sales, because that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to do economics or maths or statistics and trigonometry, what have you. And I'm like, and lo and behold, I came across you guys. So really happy and fortunate to have found you on the web, and like few years forth hence, having done the masters too. So a moment of great pride for me, and having you've been a big help along the way for me to reach this point. Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a great pleasure, and it's what I love about the masters is the kind of projects that people do. I mean, I think the innovation that we're getting now from learning from the work that our students make, and also, the fact that you are breaking new ground. It's new territory. It hasn't been done before. I just love that aspect of it. And I think that we're constantly looking for ways of making more explicit, the knowledge that is built, and the podcasts are part of that journey, as you know.
Right.
But possibly there's going to be some machine learning based on the analysis of all the dissertations that our students make. And I just wonder where that could take us. We haven't explored it yet, Lennie, but maybe we don't have enough data points for it to be a practical concept. But I suspect it may come at some point.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. You could build a miniature ChatGPT model, and away you go.
Away we go. Oh my God! I shall. Before I do anything, Lennie, I'm going to listen to this podcast and make sure we've got the right policies in place. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think there. I mean, now that you're so deep into it, Phil, what you would likely first step, at least I could be a consultant while writing your. I would like to do that pro bono. How about that? Doing some research work, developing a what do you call a global framework, an AI framework just for Consalia. How about that? That'd be a fun project to work on.
I would love you to do that. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I think the first step then there would be is just to go around and see what AI applications you currently have in your inventory. I think that would just be the first starting point, just to see every single one of them, and you'd be surprised how many you have.
I don't know if we have that many, but Eddie probably.
Trust me, they sneak into your workplace. You wouldn't know. There would be something in accounts payable that you don't even look at, but there must be some AI there. Because I think they have, like you said, permeated every angle and sphere of our lives. So you'd be surprised.
Okay. Well, there's a challenge. We'll talk about that later, Lennie.
For sure.